reports of police violence, from ongoing brutalization and tear gassing of protesters to the assault of an inmate by a sheriff's deputy right here in Washington County, to the latest incident in Philadelphia with the killing of Walter Wallace Jr. And this latest incident particularly upsets me because it brings up difficult memories of an incident that involved my special needs older brother about 10 years ago. My brother's autistic and he doesn't communicate verbally. And one night when he was having a mental health crisis, the police came to his living facility just outside Salem, and a police dog bit him in the leg. And I remember this time being a really difficult moment for my family. And I can't even begin to imagine the heartache that one feels when a loved one is killed by police. But despite this, there's a lot of good work being done, both nationally and locally. And we at the Young Democrats want to find some of the good work being done in our community. So we began to reach out to different community members and organizations to see what kind of work is being done to address injustice and reimagine the criminal justice system here in our own backyard. And I'm really excited and encouraged by what I've seen. Our goal tonight is to not only showcase and celebrate the work being done to make Washington County a more fair and just place for everyone, but to also help demystify the criminal justice system. And to that end, we have 4 great guests tonight who are going to help shed some light with their expertise and discuss the work that they or their organization are doing to improve the criminal justice system. And after they have had a chance to present, we're going to have a discussion and Q&A period where we can discuss what still needs to be done to realize a more just Washington County. And because this is a discussion about your community, I highly encourage you to submit any questions you may have in the Zoom chat. And without further ado, let me introduce our panelists for tonight. From Pacific University, we have Professor Paul Snell to talk about his proposal for a Portland Police Commission. We also have Brian Decker to discuss the work that he and Washington County Justice Initiative have been doing. And finally, we have Cameron Green and Joy Stevens from the Beaverton Human Rights Advisory Commission to talk a little bit about who they are and what they do. And we will also have my fellow Young Democrat, Emily Schnipper, who will be moderating the Zoom chat for if you have any questions for the panelists or just technical questions. Yeah, with that, I guess Professor Snell, take it away.
All right, I didn't think I'd be starting this thing. So good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here on a Friday night, as John was saying. You definitely probably have better things to do. And so talking about, reforming police departments and fighting for justice is definitely necessary work. And, it's reassuring to see so many people still showing up to do this work, because we see that it never stops and that it has to be done. So thank you for being here. I appreciate the invitation from John and Emily. I appreciate your help. Sorry for not registering earlier, so thank you for letting me in. But yeah, so as John was saying, I've been lately working on trying to get a police commission in the city of Portland. So before I do explain that, let me just kind of back up all the way and tell you a little bit about myself. So I'm a political scientist here at Pacific University in Forest Grove, but originally I'm from the LA area, Southern California, and I am the children of cops. So my dad was a captain at LAPD, and my mom was a 911 dispatcher, so she took the calls. And they started working at LAPD in the 80s, and they've dealt with all the racism, but they've also saw how that department changed a lot. So they had, back in the old days with LAPD, the police used to put battering rams to people's homes with a tank. And it has come a long way from there to not, it is by no means a perfect department, but they've really changed a lot. And part of what made that change was the way that the police are governed, made a huge difference for LA and a lot of other cities. So that's part of my background, is that I also got my PhD in political science from the University of Minnesota in Minneapolis. And I was supposed to be in Minneapolis the week George Floyd was killed. And the precinct that burned was my precinct. It was across the street from my Cub Foods where I used to get food. So I have other things I could do related to politics and political science. But with the death of George Floyd and what I know, I had to get involved. And so one of the things that hurt me and moved me the most from what I saw from George Floyd was the officer, Derek Chauvin. And what infuriated me more than anything else was not just the inhumanity, but that he knew he could get away with it. You could tell that he has been an officer on the force for over a decade. And I could tell from his indifference that he did not have good leadership. He did not have people who would hold him accountable. And I knew that had to do with the way that that department was put together in Minneapolis. And so my idea for a commission I initially pitched to Minneapolis, but they've had other concerns as of late. And I'm here, and so this is where I could do my work. And leadership is really the key thing that really shapes a department. And whether it's a sheriff's department or a police department at the local level, that really makes a huge difference. And the thing that I've seen so much, because everything that we saw come out of Floyd and everything else that's come out has been proposals for changing reform. But that's not really what we need. We really need to change the way the police are governed. That's been the key piece that's missing. We need something to sustain the reforms that we really want to see, because we know exactly how all this works, right? We have these reforms, we have these little things that we want proposed. It's on the political radar for a few minutes, but then it disappears. You need something to keep the momentum going. And what that requires is a change from the way that it works now. So I'm a professor, so I have to give you a little background on how that works. And so the way most cities are organized is you have the police department, they do what they do, they're run by a chief. And then usually it's someone like a mayor or usually a city council, but usually a mayor at the top, usually intervenes and supervises the police chief. Well, as you can imagine, police or mayors just don't have the time to focus on a police department and give it the focus that it needs. And we see this perpetually, right? When something happens, when the police mess up, mayors will show up, they'll talk to their chiefs, and then they're gone again. And you don't get that type of consistency. And it's not any mayor's fault. Good mayors, bad mayors, they're just busy. Same thing with county commissioners. And the county commissioner setup or any type of council is also a bad setup because they have multiple things to do, right? So if you had one person dealing with many things in a mayor's case, it's even worse having multiple people deal with multiple things because then no one's responsible. The best setup is having multiple people deal with one thing, right? It's almost like tutoring with students, right? You have one teacher, many students, or many tutors, many students. It'd be best to have many tutors for one student. That could do pretty good, wouldn't it? That's what you get with something like a police commission. You have many eyes on one thing. A police commission is not actually all that complicated. You know what it looks like because we see it all around us. It's boards of trustees for universities. It's board of directors for corporations. It's the same setup. You have a group of people who have their eyes on this entity in a long-term way. Now, unlike colleges and universities, or unlike schools, or like corporations, police department or police commissions are a little different in this respect. They deal with what I call the ABCs and maybe D. I'll explain the maybe D in a second. So the A is they deal with administration, which I'll show you in a minute because I will screen share and show you what that actually means. They deal with administration, they deal with B, budgets, and C, they deal with chiefs. So with administration, let's put this in plain English. So I'm gonna show you what I'm talking about, okay? So if you go to the Beaverton Police Department, they have something called a policy manual, and every police department in the country has one of these. Same thing with sheriff's departments. This tells them everything that they can do. Now, most of you are probably interested in something like uses of force. Under what conditions can police do certain things? But it ranges from everything in this manual, from uses of force to how they deal with records, patrols, traffic stops, how they deal with domestic violence, like John was saying with his brother, how they respond to certain calls, personnel, nepotism. Every policy for the department is here. And this is really where the weeds are. And this is why politics sometimes can be a problem, because politicians don't care about these little things. But police commissions, this is where they have the most work, because they basically tell chiefs and departments, this is what we're altering, right? So just to give you an example, something like, let's see, what did I have? Like uses of force here, right? What counts as deadly force? Under what conditions can they use force? What type of weapons can they use? When can they use them? That's in this policy right here. That's something that police commissions have a lot of control over. I'll put that in the link after I'm done blabbing. But that's the type of thing that really changes a department because it determines what they can do. Now, of course, police officers might violate this, of course, and be out of policy, but then they can be disciplined if they're out of policy, right? And that's the type of thing that administratively a department can do. And it ranges from everything from uses of force to how often they shred their records. I mean, it's everything that a department deals with. And having that type of granular level of control is something that we just don't see in most places. So that's the first thing, our administration. Budgets have been a big thing lately. In terms of where police allocate their resources, whether they're doing that more towards prevention efforts for mental health patients or mental health citizens, or whether they put that more towards guns. the commission gets to decide the priorities of the department in consultation with their chiefs, which brings me to the C. Chiefs make a huge difference. I mean, they're quiet because we only see them when there's a problem. But chiefs really set the tone of a culture. Like I said, I could tell in Minneapolis that the chief in there hasn't set the tone, they haven't set the leadership the right way. They don't organize the departments in a way where their police can actually complain in the way that they need to, like their officers can. They may not have a good reporting structure for uses of force. Chiefs make a huge difference. And police commissions appoint that person, they review them, and they work with them with partnership to really get things done. And so that's the type of thing that we just don't see with our regular process, and we do see in other places. Just to give you an example of the type of partnership between chiefs and police commissions, in LA, for example, a lot of community members, because the nice thing about police commissions is they're very public. So you go to there and you talk to these commissioners, you tell them what's going on. And so community members, for example, in LA said once that, hey, we noticed that there are a lot of, especially down there, a lot of Black officers. We know they're hired, but I don't see them in my neighborhood. Where are they? And so the police commissioner said, hey, chief and department, can you look into this? What's going on here? And they noticed that a lot of Black cops, for example, had desk jobs. They weren't actually on the street. So they redid that to make sure that the communities that they were serving, the officers were there. Same thing has gone with recruitment. The commission has had a lot of site tours. Who are we recruiting to be our officers? And so they literally directing the personnel department there, hey, make sure that the department reflects the community. And over the past decade, LAPD has had a lot of success with that. But that's the type of level of detail you get when you have someone consistently looking at what they're doing. So I've given the example of LA, but San Francisco has a police commission as well. Kansas City has one. Also, missing one bigger city, Honolulu does as well. Oakland just recently got one in 2017. And so I can talk about, now this is a progressive era reform, so Portland used to have one in the 20s. So if you're wondering why they moved away or some problems with them, I'd be happy to talk about that and blab at you more in Q&A. But the broader point being, police commissions are great and very straightforward reform that can really put more consistent pressure on police to really give them the oversight and the accountability that they really need. And it's something that just mayors and other councilors, just no matter their good intentions, just can't provide. So I think this is, like I said, to me, I've always said it's like baking powder. It's a very necessary ingredient in a very broad, bigger recipe for the reforms that we want to see. So I'd be happy to take your questions eventually during Q&A. Thank you for your time.
Great, thank you for that, Professor Snell. I think that it's measure 26-217 in Portland. That would propose like something similar to that. I heard it has like 70% proposal, so it looks like it's well on its way to already being implemented.
Now, that one primarily deals with discipline. That was the D. I told you there was a maybe D. So Hardesty's proposal just changes the way officers are disciplined. So in some departments, it's usually the case that the chief makes that decision by themselves. So Hardesty's proposal allows for basically an external body to really intervene in police discipline, but it doesn't deal with the ABCs. And that's what it needs to do. And that's why I will be back and going before the Charter Review Commission to deal with the ABCs, because Hardesty's plan deals with D, and D is important, don't get me wrong. That's why I think everyone should support it. But it's only 1 out of 4.
Okay, great. Let's see, we have Brian Decker next to talk about Washington County Justice Initiative.
Great, thanks, John. Thanks for inviting me here. It's a little intimidating to follow Dr. Snell there on the issues that you're working on. Washington County Justice Initiative is an organization that we founded just a few months ago over the summer. Well, it's been several months now, I guess. And it's this group of founders who, during our day jobs, are public defenders. We work in the criminal legal system representing poor people who are accused of crimes. And that has given us this perspective where we get to see up close on an individual basis the real harm that the criminal legal system as we have it today does to people. And it's something that a lot of people don't see on their day-to-day on a day-to-day basis. It's something a lot of people don't see. Maybe you get to come into jury duty once every 2 years or something like that, and you see on TV the way the criminal legal system works. But the day-to-day grind of what happens to people when they are arrested and charged with crimes is something that causes a lot of harm to people. And part of that is, by design, and part of that, when you think of, well, they're, obviously they're criminals and they're going to pay for the crimes that they did. Sure, but we're also talking about people who have been charged, who haven't been convicted yet, and who are facing a system that it has a lot of complexities and has a lot of difficulties to upend people's lives. And these are people primarily who are already suffering in many respects and already have many dimensions of vulnerability in their lives. So often what we see is people who are charged with crimes are people who are already dealing with many sorts of traumas in their lives, be it addiction, be it poverty, homelessness, mental illness. These are things that end up driving people into the criminal legal system. And another thing that ends up driving people into the criminal legal system is the criminal legal system itself, right? Because when people get there, when they are placed in jail, when they have fines imposed upon them, when they have their life under such close scrutiny, they end up cycling through again and again because the system itself causes them harm. It upsets their lives. It upsets any sort of stability that they might have. If you are arrested and you go to jail, you may be lucky if you get let out the next day, but if you're in there for even a week, you might lose your job. You might not be able to pay rent. You might lose your house. It might drive you further into homelessness and poverty, and further into addiction. And it might be a stressor that drives you further into mental illness. And so when we see these harms, the idea is that we want to try to address them at an earlier point in the process. We end up dealing with people after they've already reached some sort of crisis, right? They're already at the point in their lives where they've now been arrested and charged with crimes. What can we do as a society to prioritize addressing those harms earlier on in the process, so that we're not just talking about holding individuals accountable because they've made a series of poor choices or are alleged to have made a series of poor choices, but what can we do to address the circumstances that put them in the position to make poor choices in the first place, the circumstances that enable them to be so desperate. Things like, as I'm saying, homelessness and mental illness and addiction. And the problem is that over the past several decades, as a society, we've grown to see those problems, those real harms, as a problem that is solved by policing, as a problem that is solved by criminalizing conduct and putting people in jail and putting people in prison and putting people on probation. And they don't need to be. They shouldn't be. They can be solved more effectively and more completely and less cruelly by directly assisting people earlier on in the process, so that their poverty doesn't reach the point where they are committing crimes to address it, so that their addiction doesn't reach the point where they are going from possessing a personal use amount of a controlled substance to possessing a larger amount in order to distribute it, in order to afford their own addiction. What we've done, the way the system works now is we don't address those things. in large part, we don't address those things until somebody gets arrested and they go to court. And then then court will look at them and might say, okay, well, if you plead guilty to this crime, we can put you on probation and we can put you in a special sort of court called a mental health court, or a special sort of court called a drug court, where we have you on probation, and that's how we'll get you into services. And if you mess up in the slightest, then we're holding over you the threat of putting you in jail and the threat of ultimately sending you to prison and upending your life even worse. There's the idea of reallocating resources from this vision of solving these problems through policing and solving these problems through the criminal legal system is, if we're spending so much of our budget on policing and on the criminal legal system that we don't have anything more to spend on putting the homeless in homes, on treating addiction voluntarily, offering services to people voluntarily to treat their addiction, offering services to people voluntarily to treat their mental illness, rather than waiting until they are in crisis and they get arrested and they have handcuffs put on them and they get locked in a jail. That's where we need to be moving. We're asking the police to do too much. We're asking the criminal legal system to do too much and to solve problems that it can't solve, and for the police to do jobs that they can't do. So we need more specialists in mental illness, specialists in addiction to be responding to crises. But even more than that, we need to be allocating resources to prevent the crises before they happen, to make life better for people before they get to that point, before they hit rock bottom. And so in addition to making sure that the excesses of policing, the excessive force and abuses that come with policing are addressed, and that people are held accountable for that, we just need less of it. We need more services and less policing. And that's a larger conversation that we're trying to have with our elected officials. At Washington County Justice Initiative, what we're doing is we're trying to connect with lots of community organizations who have been out there and have been organizing for a lot longer than we have existed, and have been trying to send this message for a long time. And we're trying to also connect with our elected officials at the County Board of Commissioners, at city councils here in Washington County. And that's a real challenge in Washington County, because we're a county where you don't have one governing body that dominates everybody. Yes, we have a County Board of Commissioners, and that's within the jurisdiction of the sheriff's office for unincorporated Washington County, but we also have the city of Beaverton. We also have a city of Hillsborough as the two largest cities in Washington County. And then, you go down half the size of them to Tigard, and a little bit smaller than that is Forest Grove and Tualatin and Cornelius. And all of these jurisdictions have different governing bodies and different city councils that each have their own budgets. And many of them, too many of them, are addicted to policing as the way to solve these problems, are addicted to the idea that these are public safety issues, and the way you address public safety issues is through police. And so you see things like just this June, Washington County Board of Commissioners cutting the overall county budget by 5% because there's belt tightening going on because of the pandemic and the economic downturn, while at the same time giving a $7.2 million raise to the sheriff's office and to the district attorney to prosecute crimes, which shows you where the priorities are. And in the city of Beaverton, it's even worse. In the city of Beaverton, they cut the overall budget by nearly 14%, and raised the Beaverton Police Department budget by nearly 11% at the same time. Which again, just eating up more and more of our tax dollars by trying to solve these problems expensively, ineffectively, and cruelly through policing. So what we're trying to do is to get community organizations in contact with elected officials to advocate for what the community really needs to address these problems. And I think what's coming up next in the month of November, the county has a series of community investment conversations, which is designed to address exactly this. The budget is coming up for next year now. Community, where do you want your tax dollars to go? What budget do you want? So we're trying to get people to let your elected officials know at those conversations.
Great, thank you for that, Brian. Yeah, I personally myself live out here in North Plains, so yeah, it's interesting how Washington County just encompasses so many jurisdictions, and they have varying approaches to how they view police or how they administer police. Finally, we have two people from the Beaverton Human Rights Advisory Commission, and I'm not sure how you two wanted to go about doing this. If Cameron or Joy, you wanted to go first, and then the other go, or how did you? I see Joy pointing at Cameron.
Sure, I will go first, I suppose. So I'm Cameron Green from the Beaverton Human Rights Advisory Commission. Our function is to advise Beaverton, the city government of Beaverton, and its constituent elements on human rights concerns and try and promulgate policies within that ecosystem towards seeing a respect for human rights. Most recently, we have been engaged in a discussion, shall I say, with the Beaverton Police Department. Professor Snell showed you the manual for the Beaverton Police Department. We have become very familiar with that document on HRAC. We have gone over it almost line by line. Not line by line, it's something like 270 pages. It's enormous. And learning how Beaverton PD operates and really what can be done to ameliorate the difficulties of policing and how the police interact with the community. So that's really what we've been doing a lot of. Joy, you got anything to add to kind of our function? I think people aren't very familiar with who we are.
Sure. So it's our, we are established under city ordinance as a committee. And so we are actually part of city government, unpaid. And our meetings are public record, and we have to meet all of those requirements. And our function established in the charter is to take up issues regarding civil rights. And at the end of our year, or however often, it's not specific how often, we make recommendations to the city to take those up. And so this year turned into something else entirely. So first year on the committee, it's my first year. And so we were going in one direction, and then George Floyd happened and Breonna Taylor happened, and it stopped us in our tracks, and COVID shut us up at home, and we had time to think about it. So we went in a whole other direction and set up, because the police already come to every one of our meetings and they review major incidents with us already answering to us, which is a pretty big deal. We set up a series of 6 discussion times to find out first, how do they run their things? And how can we prevent George Floyd and Breonna Taylor from happening here in small bites? Our last meeting was the use of force policy. The next one was citizen oversight. I encourage you to come to the meeting. It's Wednesday night, the day after the election. You're welcome. It's public, it's on Zoom. So that's what we're doing. We are undertaking to understand, but also ask questions. My impression is they seem to be pretty secure in the knowledge of their own system. And, but they have a PR problem. So they want to continue the conversations with us. And we're running into unions. But so that's what we're doing. We're trying to have thoughtful, two-sided conversations, asking hard questions and getting answers about how we can prevent what's going on in Portland, what happens to every person of color I've ever met, from happening here and from happening here anymore.
Great, thank you for that. One question I did have was, is anyone open and able to apply for the Human Rights Advisory Commission, or how does that work?
We are. In fact, I believe the application period is open right now.
We just closed.
Oh, okay.
We closed on the 15th. You have to live or work within the Beaverton city limits. And it's a one-page application where you tell people why you want to apply and why HRAC. There are a number of committees. And then we just went through, we have 4 openings this year. We had 18 applications.
All right, thank you for that. Let's see, we're looking pretty good on time. Yeah, I guess we can open up to some Q&A. I think there was one question I saw in the chat from Amelia Manlove. I will try to unmute you here, Amelia. Okay, Amelia, you should be good.
Yeah, I had a question for Professor Snell about, it sounded like a lot of, maybe not a lot of, but some larger cities, San Francisco, et cetera, are pursuing police commissions, but is that strategy happening at any smaller level? Because I live in Hillsborough, it's a city of 100,000 people, and we have the same problems. So I would love to see that here.
Yeah, so the short answer to your question is I don't know. Yeah, because I mostly looked at larger cities, but of course I will still filibuster. So there is a longer answer to your question. So police commissions are actually a bit of an old idea. They were a progressive era reform. So a lot of cities took them up in the early 19-teens, and they had problems because mostly they were at the mercy basically of the chiefs and their departments because they just didn't have enough information. They've gotten better at that over time. But to answer your more direct question about size, I've talked to some other police commissions and chiefs about how their system works. And the executive director of the police commission in LA, he used to be a police chief himself of a smaller city in California, I think of Pomona or Santa Ana. And he said that basically not every city is going to need a police commission. Like Hillsborough, or sorry, not Hillsborough, but Forest Grove, where I am right now, that city is sufficiently small that the city council is probably fairly responsive. But he did say, and I do think I agree with this reasoning, if the city has enough diversity and there are enough communities where it's going to be hard to really get their input on these matters, then a city would benefit. And I'm with you. I think, I'm a Beaverton resident myself, Beaverton, Hillsborough, yeah, they would probably benefit from something like this. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. Washington County probably overall, especially Portland, as we know, Yeah, basically any probably medium-sized city would benefit from something like this.
Okay. Anyone have another question?
Can I jump in to build on
Absolutely.
point there on the applicability of this to medium-sized cities? And you know, Washington County is a suburban county, and I think that I think that there's a danger in having a sense that all of this that's going on is going on somewhere else and is going on in the big cities. But even right here in Washington County, we're grappling with our own local issues, with our own local law enforcement. We've got, John alluded to a sheriff's deputy who has been charged criminally now for an assault on a person who was taken into custody on a DUI, a Latino man, a couple years ago, that was investigated by the sheriff's office itself and investigated by the Washington County Prosecutor's Office, and they declined to do anything about it until George Floyd happened, and now we're going to you know, try to get out in front of something like this. We have I think that the statistics have shown that statewide they did a study. They have an ongoing study now of traffic stops and the treatment of people in various groups during traffic stops and pedestrian stops. Mm-hmm. And Washington County Sheriff's Office, the Beaverton Police Department, and the Hillsborough Police Department, the three largest law enforcement agencies in Washington County, each showed statistically having disparate treatment of members of our Latinx community when they are pulled over during traffic stops, as opposed to white people. Some of them are searching, like taking people out of their cars during a traffic stop to conduct pat downs and searches on them at higher rates. Some of them are arresting at higher rates people who are Latino or Latina or Latinx, and as opposed to people who are white. And we have, there was a case in the Court of Appeals overturned for a Washington County criminal case that was overturned just in the past year because of racist discrimination in jury selection. Yeah, a lot of people have heard of like the Curtis Flowers case, where Curtis Flowers was on death row in Mississippi for 20 years and got exonerated because he kept having trial after trial after trial, where his rights were being violated because he's Black and they were kicking all of the Black people systematically off the juries. Well, that happened right here in Washington County too, in a trial a few years ago, and the case got reversed at the Court of Appeals. They have to do the whole trial over again because the prosecutor used peremptory strikes to kick somebody off the jury for race-based reasons. And the very prosecutor who was in that case is our elected district attorney in Washington County. So it is a homegrown problem that we need to keep addressing right here. We can't just say that it's something that's happening in big cities. It's a problem here in Washington County as well.
Thank you for that, Brian. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I have a question for both you, Mr. Decker, and Professor Snell. So with these abuses, which I did question the police chief about at the last meeting, even if there is disciplinary action, it's investigated, they find it, they take it disciplinary action, the union can overturn this. Now, I will say, when I was a firefighter in that union, if I had done that, I'd be out of a job with a union, because that's how that's supposed to work. Union protects your working conditions, but not if you're doing things wrong. So how, in reforming this system, do you address that?
I'll start with, I've never heard of anything like that with you. I mean, that's just well, because part of the issue is that unions are not part of the government structure. So they're not part of the department at all. In fact, most departments very rarely even let mayors or their police commissions have any say in discipline. So I will just stop by saying that I find the intervention of a NGO or a non-governmental entity in the police department's running highly irregular. And yeah, that's something that would definitely be renegotiated during a union contract. That's just
run the tape.
Very rare.
Run the tape.
Yeah, yeah.
Because that's what they said, and that's what happened.
Yeah, it's one thing for them to have, help ensure due process. It's another thing for them to be, they can maybe be involved in decision making, but not have any final say. Because that's usually chiefs are fiercely protective of that power, because they usually want to be able to discipline their own officers. So I find that highly irregular, and that requires more information.
I agree with you.
Yeah.
But it is what happened. And there's a state law that protects them. Let me pull this up.
Are you talking about arbitration clauses, Joy?
No. I'm talking about, here it is. No. Oregon Revised Statutes 181.854 that says a citizen review. Citizen oversight cannot overturn the decision of a union, a police union.
So that depends, because it depends on if the civilian oversight bodies, because they vary. So a civilian oversight body like they have in Portland is just they provide community input. And the reason why unions have that in there is because they want to make sure that their officers are protected through the processes that the department has, and also because the department will have information that they sometimes can't give to civilian entities.
Of course.
That is very different, however, from a governance unit, which is why my proposal is a little different. Because it's like I said, they are, a police commission is functionally the mayor or whatever. So technically they're not external to the department. So I'm not sure if that particular statute would apply, because technically it's not, so a police commission is not a civilian review board. They run the department, they're a governance body. So I would have to get into I'd have to look at that more carefully, but that's just my initial off the top of my head assessment of that.
Joy, I think somebody is asking for the name of that policy in the chat, if you're willing.
Yeah.
I'm writing it right now.
All right. And it looks like we have some participant questions. Garrett was asking about some equitable rollout from the new metro policy. So I'll unmute you so you can ask yourself.
It's just a question to Brian. Metro has embarked upon this big with the Here Together. It's called the Supportive Housing Services, which addresses some of the things. One of the concerns would be that it's not going to be rolled out evenly or uniformly throughout the metro area. What would you recommend in doing that? And I have a vested interest in asking this question.
Sure. So tell me more about where the concern is that it wouldn't be rolled out evenly. Where's the issue?
The issue is that it's going to be who is actually going to implement it. It's going to be implemented by a bunch of NGOs. It's not clear where the oversight, the rules are still being written, how much county oversight, how much each individual city gets to change what is happening on the ground in the local areas. That's the issue. Right. Metro has a giant oversight board, but they're not going to be telling everybody how to do it. They're going to be allocating funds, leaving the county to deal with the NGOs. But again, then you have 24 cities.
Right. Which it just highlights the issue. I mean, particular to Washington County, but really in the whole metro area of this sort of balkanization of local government, right? That we've got these individual government bodies that are fighting for a piece of the pie, and they each have their agendas, and they're each somebody to have a conversation with about where the priorities lie. It sounds like the issue that you're raising, Garrett, is probably beyond my expertise in terms of how to divide up how to ensure that the money is divided up equitably. I mean, I think we can agree it sounds like a thorny problem. But as far as I think there's a benefit to focusing that budgeting on housing to begin with, right? That there's a win there in saying this is a piece of the pie that's going to go to housing, as opposed to fighting homelessness or houselessness on the back end by arresting people for going to the bathroom or charging their cell phone when they live outside. That wasn't an answer to your question, but I've talked for a little while. So.
Looks like we have a question from Sashruta next. Let me go ahead and unmute you, Sashruta.
Yeah, thank you, John. So a couple years back, there was a study about body cams and anti-bias training that shows that those reforms, really statistically, they have not been effective in reducing incidences of violence. And these are studies published in Journal of Psychology and review done by the Office of Mayor in Washington, D.C. Is it still worth pursuing these reforms then?
I can start with that. So there are just counting here, there's 5 different criminal defense attorneys on this Zoom right now. You're probably going to get 5 different answers about body cams. I personally like them. In my view, the police are going to commit racialized violence. The police are going to commit human rights violations by their very nature. That's who they are. That's what they are. I personally like having body cams on the police so that at least we can see what they're doing and that there's at least some evidence of what they are doing. Before, it's simply the officer's word. And I mean, think back, Rodney King riots. That was, luckily someone had a video camera on the officers at that point. So can we usually see it though? No, because cops are of course notorious for, oh, my body cam malfunctioned at that time, or I forgot to turn it on, or the body camera mysteriously fails. Hoods on cars will be popped up. Some body cams are mic'd, so you can actually hear what's going on. Not all of them, but yeah. So personally, I like them because the police, like I said, the police are going to police until we have the systemic reforms that we need. And frankly, until we have something that's not the police in charge of our public safety. So if they are going to exist, I'd like to at least see what they're doing some of the time.
Yeah, I'd like to piggyback on Cameron's point here. I think you're right. I think the way to think about all these reforms, like I said, that they're ingredients in a recipe. And I don't think any reform in isolation really does the trick. But and especially, with the data you have for the effectiveness of body cams, this relates to my point though about accountability. And I think the Officer Derek Chauvin's a good example of this. If there had been a body cam and there had been a really effective investigation of his actions prior, so not what he did to George Floyd, but throughout his career, and he had gotten the discipline, he had good supervisors, they would have had evidence to use against him, right? And I think that's what I mean is, a lot of these reforms are part of broader things. So like I said, in the body cam case, if they can help supervisors hold their officers accountable, it's probably overall a net positive, because officers are going to get the hint, right? If they know that their bosses are going to come for them, just like we all do. If you know your boss is coming for you because you do something inappropriate and they have video proof, that makes a huge difference. So those are my 2 cents.
I knew that all cats are beautiful.
So I guess I'll take the opposite position on body cams. I mean, like, as I said, in my day job, I'm a public defender, and if I put my criminal defense attorney hat on, I like getting the footage and I like seeing what happened, and I can count the number of times that it's helped me prove my case. You know, it has happened too many times to count. But if I take that hat off and I put on my taxpayer hat and I put on, you know, when I'm just a citizen of Washington County who wants to see things get better, body cameras don't exist in a vacuum, and they cost money, and they're another way to suck resources into police departments. They're a new toy for police departments, and studies have shown that they don't meaningfully move the ball on excessive use of force and on racial disparities in policing. So I think that there's problems that they solve, but I think that they're not necessarily the most effective bang for the buck in terms of how you're trying to solve those problems.
One question that we came up with in advance that we came up with to sort of like address, like demystify the criminal justice system would be, what's something that each of you wish that people knew about the Washington County criminal justice system that usually goes unnoticed? I don't know who wants to.
It's not what, there's not a lot of it that goes unnoticed, honestly. If you ask any of the criminal defense lawyers, that they tend to notice it after a while, the certain proclivities of the system within Washington County. Let's see. Oh, and here's Mallory here. Yep. So I'm not sure what exactly you're looking for as an answer here.
Just I think it's sort of like for those of us who are not involved with the justice system, you know, in our jobs, or, you know, people that are not like typically exposed to it on a daily basis, if there's anything like you wish that we knew. And there may not be, but thought we would ask.
I wish people knew. I think that the misconception is that the way the criminal system works is that the police investigate a crime and catch a bad guy and take him to jail, and then he has his day in court, and there's a trial and there's evidence, and he is presumed innocent, and then the jury decides if there's enough evidence to convict him, and then if he really did it, then he's convicted. And I think that people think that that's the way it works because that's probably the way it's supposed to work. But what really happens is that the police are out there all the time looking to find somebody that they think is some sort of ne'er-do-well, right? Which oftentimes is racialized or classist. And they'll interrupt them in their lives, and they'll look for the crime that they can charge them with. pull somebody over for some traffic violation and go on this fishing expedition and look for the crime that you can charge them with. And the fact is, we've made so many things crimes that people are doing crimes all the time. And the only thing that stops us from going to jail for them is that most of the time we're lucky enough to not be the people that the police are pulling over at that particular moment. But there's people that are in that group of people. There's people who the police are pulling over all the time and are interrupting their lives to go look for crimes and arrest them. And then they go to jail, and they'll stay in jail because they're too poor to bail out. And it doesn't matter that they haven't been found guilty of anything yet. They have a bail set for them that's based on, you know, how serious people think that the crime is. And they can't afford to post $5,000 any more than post $5 million. So they can't get out of jail, and they're going to sit in jail until they have their day in court, which means they don't want to wait to have that full, fair day in court with a trial, with evidence, with all of the witnesses. They want to get out as soon as they can. And if the quickest ticket out of jail is to sign a plea agreement that says, yes, I agree to be convicted of this crime, but put me on probation and I can get out of jail and get back to my life and hopefully my job is still waiting for me, and hopefully I can still afford my apartment. That's what most people do. And that's how the cases work over 90% of the time in the Washington County courthouse. Over 90% of the time, it's just people signing pleas because they think that'll get them out of jail. And then they are mixed up in the criminal legal system. Then they're on probation. And then if you thought it was bad before having a police officer looking over your shoulder to find any little crime, well, now you're really going to be supervised every step of the way. And that's how we're going to make sure that you get the assistance that you need with your addiction. And that's how we're going to make sure that you get the assistance that you need with mental illness, as opposed to offering you that service in the first place before the police got involved.
Yeah, I'll take a really brief
sorry,
one. Just really brief answer to your question. The thing that comes to mind for me is, I think, just know your departments and know your officers as much as you can. Really try and get, if you can interact with them, but especially any community events that they have or community input, see what are ways in which you can really be engaged and involved with your police departments and see what work they're doing, what their priorities are, because it'll teach you a lot. But basically in short, try and get as much in-person, on the ground information as you can.
One thing I wanted to, I think this topic is a good segue to this next question. I got an email yesterday from someone who doesn't look like they're in the chat tonight, but they brought up a very interesting topic, sort of along these lines about an innocence commission, sort of like what the state of North Carolina has, and I'm curious what all of your thoughts are about that for like expunging people's previous convictions and things like that. Like, what thoughts did you guys have about like either the state of Oregon implementing something like that, or just generally? I don't.
With that, I think I'll be the first to plead ignorance. Can you tell us a little more about how these things work?
Yeah, I'll confess I didn't learn about it till yesterday. But
what is this thing?
I know, apparently not a popular concept so far. But yeah, at least what this person was telling me was the state of North Carolina, and forgive me if I mess up any of the details with this, but the state of North Carolina has a commission, I believe it's appointed by the governor, that kind of reviews people's convictions, and then it's like I think it's appointed by the governor, and then they review these cases and determine whether or not to overturn them. I'll try to
Cameron just posted a link to the website, which, yes, a neutral fact-finding state agency charged with investigating post-conviction claims of innocence.
It sounds like a good idea. I know I mean, I've heard in some of the cities across the country where they've elected in the past 10 years this wave of so-called progressive prosecutors. A lot of those elected DAs have instituted offices called conviction integrity units in their office to go back and review old cases to see, was there any sort of violation of due process, or is there an actual claim to innocence in those old cases? You know, and I also have to plead ignorance on like how effective that's been, how many cases that's actually helped people with. But it seems like a good idea because I think that there's so many, you know, thousands of cases a day of people getting, people signing themselves up for criminal convictions that I'm sure that there's many that are falling through the cracks where nobody ever took a really good hard look at.
Well, and on that note, I was just taking a look at the website just for data purposes, and yeah, they received over data composite of 2020. I don't know when they started, but what is this? 2,800 claims, 28 cases closed, 137 in 2020, and only 12 exonerations. That's less than a 0.04% success rate. So yeah, I have similar questions. 12 out of 2,800 is not the best number or ratio in the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the system makes it very hard to go correct an error once there's been one, right? And a number like that might, at first blush, give you confidence that, well, if it's that small, the number of exonerations, that means that by far most of the time we're getting it right. When really, I think we just structurally have a lot invested in maintaining the answers, maintaining the results that we have and calling them right.
I will say that in my discussions, our discussions with the Beaverton police, they are very invested in their rightness. And it's a challenge to get past that, to ask the right questions, to get to the I don't knows. And I think that's the first step.
It's a concept that I heard about recently. I believe it was like Antonin Scalia cited like finality as like the basis for like criminal justice or something, which just seems just absolutely wrong. That defeats the purpose. Yeah.
Because I said so.
Right. Yeah. we have closure now. Yeah. More locally, one question we have here is there's a statewide initiative to decriminalize drugs currently on the ballot. What are considerations that voters should bear in mind? Like what steps will be needed to take in like afterwards, like in terms of like maybe expunging prior convictions, things like that?
I was in Washington State when we decriminalized marijuana for recreational use. And once the initiative passed, then they went through and expunged the records of everyone who'd been convicted. They let people out of jail for whatever that was, however that was worded in the legislation. And that's what Washington did.
Let's also keep in mind that decriminalization and legalization are different. You're not going to see a meth and heroin shop pop up next to the weed dispensary. That's not happening. So if there's I don't know if there's going to be an expungement. I honestly haven't looked into that particular one enough. However, I do know that it's modeled on several decriminalization measures, most notably, I believe it was Portugal's. And generally, while it's not treated as a criminal offense anymore, it still does make your life substantially more difficult if the authorities find a substantial quantity of drugs on your person or within your possession.
Right. I think like for some people, like decriminalization and legalization kind of get thrown around like interchangeably. So I think making sure that's clear is important.
There was an unintended consequence, though, in Washington because they had to rewrite the DUI laws because what was intoxicated, what was under the influence, and it had to be established for each substance that had been decriminalized. And a point of interest, Cameron, marijuana has been categorized as no medical use, where heroin, morphine, cocaine have medical uses. So it's a little backwards.
Oh yeah, federal schedules, a lot of fun.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like we had a question from Alex in the chat.
If he wants to unmute himself. But I mean, I think we were going to ask about bail. I don't know what Alex is doing, but I think we wanted to ask about bail related issues anyway, which is, it looks like, some places are trying to reconsider cash bail. I think the original question was, can we put something on the ballot to reduce bail? Or just, is there any possibility of changing that system?
Yeah, so Oregon has a cash bail system. As far as particular amounts of bail, they're generally speaking not set by law, by the legislature. There are some crimes that people are charged with where they are set at a minimum amount of bail of $50,000, and then you have to post 10%. So you have to pay $5,000 out of your pocket. But for the most part, it's left up to the discretion of a judge when you appear in front of the judge and say, I'm in jail and I'd like to bail out of jail and I can't afford to bail out of jail. It's mostly left up to the judge to just decide what the appropriate amount of bail to set for you is. I know that there have been efforts in other states to eliminate cash bail entirely or almost entirely, and instead rely on systems assessing the risk that a person is going to pose a danger to society while the case is going on, or the risk that the person is going to flee from court. A lot of those metrics that have been developed over the past few decades have their own problems because they have some racism baked into them. So, some things that are going to disadvantage people who are members of some groups and advantage people who are members of other groups in ways that don't really track the risk that they pose. So there is a challenge in making sure that what replaces cash bail isn't something that is is unfair just in an entirely different way. One problem in Washington County is that a lot of jurisdictions have something called pretrial services, where a wing of the court will supervise you while your case is pending, and you haven't been convicted yet. You are innocent until proven guilty, but we want to make sure that we know where you are, and you come back to court and you won't pose a danger to society while your case is going on. And so we're going to have somebody supervise you. Kind of like having a probation officer, only maybe not as involved as a probation officer. A lot of jurisdictions have something like that, and Washington County doesn't have that. Washington County just has a big jail, a bigger jail, I think, per capita than Multnomah County does, and has a lot of people waiting pretrial in jail. If you are going to get out of jail while your case is going on, oftentimes you have to bring to the court somebody that you suggest can supervise you and will report to the court, because the court doesn't have an office that does that for themselves. So you've got to convince the court that your mom is a responsible person who will keep an eye on you and who will rat you out to the court if you violate your conditions of release or something like that. And for a lot of people, that's difficult. A lot of people don't have those connections, and it doesn't mean that they're a flight risk or a risk of danger. It just means that they don't have those connections, and those resources aren't there for them.
Another question that that I wanted to bring up was, what are some ways that our local municipalities, our county government can stop the criminalization of homelessness and survival strategies, especially with as COVID and the reverberations of that threaten to displace more people? I'm curious what thoughts you guys have about that.
I think that Beaverton, they do have an ordinance on the books that criminalizes sleeping in your car, which is criminalizing poverty. And when I joined the commission, what I wanted to do was get that repealed. And I asked, and at that time, a year ago, Beaverton had 0 shelter beds. But starting next month, they're going to start having 20 shelter beds during the winter. It's a start, but it would be great to not criminalize homeless behavior, because what are you supposed to do? This is my hot button. I have been homeless. It sucks. It's not a reflection of your intelligence or your aptitude or your ability to work or anything like that. It's just sometimes that happens to people, especially more and more as we get away from systems from a government that supports people to a government that criminalizes specific behaviors and is intolerant. That's my thought.
Great, thank you. Another question. How do you think the outcome of the national election will affect local policing strategies, if at all?
Well, as the resident political scientist here, I would say it really depends on, of course, who wins the Senate. But if, based upon projections, you have Democrats projected to win the Senate and they'll likely keep the House, I imagine you will see something coming out of Congress dealing with reforming police brutality, reporting, et cetera. So what that would mean is that I think you would see the federal government helping states and the municipalities make their reforms, but they can impose very little. But I imagine you would see renewed efforts from a Democratic Congress to aid already existing reform initiatives. And also probably like more, putting more into effect Obama's proposed policies from the end of his term after Ferguson. So that I can imagine you saying, but most policing is local. So they're really not going to try and make massive interventions. They're just going to provide a helping hand. is my guess.
Do you, one thing I've read a little bit about is I'm not sure, Dr. Snell, if you have any insight into the national conversation about qualified immunity, whether that's something that it seems like there might be some talk about ending qualified immunity, and for of us who aren't in the business, I guess qualified immunity is this like judge-made law. It's not on the books anywhere. It's just made up by judges that says that if you sue police officers for violating your civil rights by denying you your life or your liberty without due process, or by discriminating against you, if you sue police officers for doing that thing, and the particular thing that they did hasn't been clearly established to be unconstitutional, meaning there hasn't already been some court case saying that very specific thing is unconstitutional, then they are immune from being sued for that. And so that's one thing on the national level that could impact local jurisdictions, is if the federal courts permitted more lawsuits to go forward attacking police brutality when it happens without granting immunity to police officers just because no police officer happened to do that particular very specific horrible thing to somebody in the past in a court case.
Next question, looks like another from Sushruta.
Let's see. Go ahead, Sushruta. Did you want to say it, or did you want me just to read it and answer? It's up to you.
I mean, you can go ahead and read it out loud, or whichever one.
So your question was, how can police commissions help from within to move away from using police and carceral justice to deferring to outside bodies established for restorative justice? Yeah, because basically, like I've been saying, they set the template. So if you want to move, so this would involve two things. One of them being where we're allocating current resources, right? So if we're still allocating our resources to incarceration towards punitive places rather than community involvement, rather than in restorative places, then that's what you're going to see. So because they set the budgets, it just depends on what they want their departments to do. So partially that has to do with city councils and the people who set the budget overall. If they reallocate that money, that's one thing. But yeah, a police commission, since they set the department's priorities in consultation with their chief, they could change that. So it really depends on how best they think they can reshuffle the pie, so to speak, or reshuffle the deck. That said, in terms of specifics, it really depends. So a lot of that would be, for policing, the police are really the front door into the criminal justice system. So like I was giving the example, I mean, we've talked about pretextual stops before, right? Like if they put in their policies manual, we're not going to pull over people for a broken tail light or for not having tags. That makes a difference. That means that a lot of people are not going to come before the police in the first place. But it also could take other forms like community intervention. Maybe we could have the police make sure that they are more involved in helping felons get reintegrated back into society. It just depends. It's really choose your adventure once you're setting policy at that high level. So I'm sorry for the very vague answer, but it just really depends on what they, as the boss, decide to tell their chief to do. It's a good question.
Okay, looks like Veronica has a question. Let me go and unmute you, Veronica.
Oh, thanks. I'm terribly sorry I didn't join you sooner, so this could have already been discussed. But Multnomah County has a new DA, Mike Schmidt. Actually, Clackamas has a new DA who is not anywhere near as conservative as his predecessor. Is there any possible impact on Washington County's DA? I mean, is there, do you think that changes certainly in Multnomah would be helpful to moving towards new considerations in Washington County?
So yes and no. Each DA in each county is sort of has their own power center and has their own, well, enormous amount of power that they can wield, enormous amount of discretion that they can use to decide what to charge and when to charge it and against whom to charge various crimes, and what kind of plea offers to offer, and what kind of sentences to recommend. Those are all things that each individual county is going to have its own discretion to decide. The way I think that the election of Mike Schmidt and other reform prosecutors in various areas could impact Washington County is there's going to be some pressure on the state legislature to make some reforms to the criminal laws that apply statewide. Or at the very least, there will be less pressure in the opposite direction, right? If you have all these very traditional, very conservative DAs all across the state telling the state legislature, you need to criminalize this, this, and this, and make it easier for us to prove these cases and arrest these people, then a lot of the legislators are going to be doing that. But if we've got somebody who's elected in a landslide in the largest county in the state going to the legislature and saying the opposite and saying we need to really change these things that are, drug war relics and make a lot of fixes to the system that we have, then that's something that could actually affect statewide our criminal system, and you could see impacts of that in Washington County. I think the problem is that when legislators write laws and create new crimes, put new crimes on the books, what they're thinking of is the most evil archetype of somebody who commits this particular crime, something that's right in the center of, if you're thinking of a burglar, you're thinking of a cat burglar who's coming in and stealing a TV or something like that. But so that's what the legislators think of when they put the crimes on the books. But when the crimes get put into practice in the counties, it's the DAs who get to decide who to charge with what crimes. And they have a tremendous incentive to charge the most serious crime that they can possibly think they could fit this case into, which means you end up seeing people charged with burglary for something like, going over to your father-in-law's house after a heated telephone argument, and when he opens the door, you punch him in the face or something like that. Well, now you've entered his house to commit a crime, and so you've committed burglary, and so you're going to be charged with burglary as opposed to a simple misdemeanor assault or something like that. When the problem is that there's this disconnect at the county level of DAs thinking at the margins and having these incentives to overcharge things, and the state level where the people who write the laws think we're really only punishing the real bad criminals with the real bad crimes.
Great, thank you. In the interest of time, since we're almost at 8:30, I wanted to give each of you and the panel a chance for just to give us some closing remarks and maybe a recommendation for a something we can read, or a video we can watch or something, just to for homework for our for us to review.
And feel free to put your organizational link in the chat if you have anything like that you want people to see, anything we can get involved with. Feel free to post that or just mention that before we head out. That'd be great.
Well, I would say for homework, get involved. You can go onto the Beaverton City website and there's a link to us, HREC. There's a link to all of the committees, and watch one of our meetings. You see how they go. And good, getting involved.
I just put a link to my organization's website in the chat. WCJI talks about some of these issues and has links to some of the local governing bodies, keeps track of events that are coming up, like the community investment conversations coming up in the next few weeks that I mentioned. And just to echo what Joy just said, you know, you can do so much. There's so much of your local government is just sitting right there, having these meetings on a regular basis, and go to them, find out what's going on, you know, make your voice heard in what's going on. It's everywhere. It's every week. And if they're only hearing from some people about some issues, then they're not getting the whole picture.
Yeah, then I put in the chat the link to the Facebook group for the Portland Police Initiative. So please join. It provides a lot more information. So if you're like context, information about police commissions, that's where I'm providing more public information to build support for this in Portland. But if there's any interest in, you know, if you're thinking you want to pursue this or try and get Hillsborough or Beaverton to do it, I mean, it would require a change to the city charters or county charters to get something like this implemented. But, you know, it's a small enough area, we could get it done. Elected officials tend not to be the most supportive of this because they stand to lose from it. But if you think that we benefit from something like this, please send for the link to other organizations. I have charter language written, so I've done it myself, a proposal that addresses many of the shortcomings that these entities have had in the past. So I'd be happy to just give you like a draft to put in the right hands. I would be more than happy to help out. So please reach out there. Then you can find me on Pacific University's webpage. I'm in the politics department. Yeah, so I'd be happy to help. But I think, as you see, if we want to continue, like I've been saying, to keep the ball rolling, we need a variety of reforms in a lot of ways, including governance ones.
Wonderful. And Cameron, did you have anything to add? Or
everyone else has said some really good and wise things. So I will jump in with you know, the less wise things, but still helpful advice. Stay together, stay tight, and leave your phones at home.
all right. Great. Well, thank you all for joining us tonight. I want to thank our four panelists, Professor Paul Snell, Brian Decker, Cameron Green, and Joy Stevens, for taking time out of their schedules to join us. And I also want to give a special shout out to Alex Berry, Emily Schnipper, Sashruta Chandramuli, and Daniel Mogdateri for all of their help in making this event possible for y'all tonight. And finally, thanks to all the local organizations that helped spread the word for tonight's forum. I saw we had a lot of word of mouth, and people came from different got different sources, so that's awesome. And if you enjoy this event, you can check for future events on our Washco Young Dems Facebook page, as well as the Washington County Democrats events calendar. Young Democrats also meet every fourth Monday of each month, and we absolutely encourage you guys to stop by or recommend anyone you think might be interested. With that, have a good night, everyone, and have a safe and fun Halloween.
Thanks so much,
Thank you.
everybody.
You all have been a great audience, too. I've learned a ton from the chat window myself.
Yeah.
So.
Definitely.
So thank you, and thank you, John. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thanks.
Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you all so much. And then John and Emily, if you guys want to stay on just for